Tonight, we're monitoring a rapidly developing crisis in one of the planet's most strategically critical waterways. A crisis ignited by language that permits no ambiguity or misunderstanding. A crisis that has placed American naval forces on their highest state of readiness in decades. Iran has delivered an extraordinary and unprecedented ultimatum to the United States Navy. Any American warship that ventures near Iranian territorial waters will be regarded as a hostile combatant and may face military attack without additional warning. This is not standard diplomatic theater. This is not the familiar cycle of regional saber rattling. This represents a fundamental declaration that the operational rules of engagement have been rewritten. Iranian naval forces have been dispersed throughout the Persian Gulf. Coastal anti-ship missile batteries have been brought to combat readiness. Fast attack boats are conducting aggressive maneuvers near the Strait of Hormuz. And American commanders, monitoring every movement in real time, now face decisions that could determine whether the coming hours bring de-escalation or open warfare. Tonight, on HEMS Reports, I'm Dav, and we're going to examine what triggered this dangerous ultimatum, precisely what Iran is threatening to do, how the United States is responding, and whether the Persian Gulf is about to transform into an active battlefield. The flashpoint that never cooled. The Persian Gulf has functioned as a geopolitical flashpoint for generations. For decades, American and Iranian naval forces have operated in extremely close proximity, sometimes within direct visual range of each other, in waters that both nations consider absolutely vital to their core security interests. The United States maintains its Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, projecting military power throughout a region that supplies a substantial portion of global oil production. Iran regards the Gulf as its natural sphere of influence, waters it has patrolled, contested, and defended for centuries of its history. This enforced proximity has produced dangerous incidents before. In 1988, the USS Vincennes tragically shot down an Iranian civilian airliner, killing all 290 people aboard, an accident that remains seared into Iranian national memory and continues to shape Iranian perceptions of American military operations in the region. In 2016, Iranian Revolutionary Guard forces seized 2 American patrol boats that had strayed into Iranian waters, briefly detaining 10 American sailors in an incident that dominated international headlines for days. Countless other encounters, near misses, aggressive maneuvers, warning shots across bows, tense radio exchanges, have occurred without making international news. But the current situation is categorically different in nature and severity. The warning issued by Tehran represents a formal declaration of hostile intent. It establishes an explicit red line with the clear implication that crossing it will result in immediate military action. And it arrives at a moment when tensions between Iran and the United States have already reached their highest levels in years. Nuclear negotiations have comprehensively collapsed. International sanctions have systematically strangled the Iranian economy. Israeli military strikes have progressively degraded Iran's regional proxy networks, and hardline elements within Tehran have successfully consolidated political power, marginalizing more moderate voices. In this volatile environment, the warning is not merely rhetorical posturing. It is a loaded weapon being deliberately aimed at the American fleet. The warning, coordinated and unmistakable. The Iranian warning was delivered through multiple official channels simultaneously, a coordinated communication strategy specifically designed to ensure it could not be misunderstood, dismissed, or ignored. The Iranian Foreign Ministry released a formal diplomatic statement declaring that Iranian territorial waters extend 12 nautical miles from the coastline, consistent with established international maritime law. But then it added language that dramatically expanded the effective threat zone. The statement read, "Any foreign military vessel that enters Iranian territorial waters without explicit authorization, or that approaches within 50 nautical miles of Iranian shores in what we determine to be a threatening manner, will be considered hostile and treated accordingly." 50 nautical miles. That is emphatically not territorial waters under any recognized interpretation of international law. That is international waters, open ocean where vessels of all nations have traditionally operated freely under the universally recognized law of the sea. Iran is unilaterally declaring that a vast expanse of the Persian Gulf has now become a restricted military zone under its exclusive control. The Revolutionary Guard Navy, which operates separately from Iran's regular navy and answers directly to the supreme leader, issued its own statement, employing far more explicitly martial language. The enemies of the Islamic Republic should understand clearly that our coastal defense systems are fully activated, our vessels are deployed and ready, and our warriors are prepared for action. Any American ship that threatens our sovereignty will be destroyed without hesitation. This is not a warning subject to interpretation. This is a solemn promise, the language of destruction, of battlefield readiness, of promises rather than warnings. This transcends diplomatic communication. This is the unmistakable language of imminent war. Within hours of these public statements, commercial satellite imagery confirmed that the aggressive rhetoric was being backed by concrete military action on the ground. Iranian fast attack boats, small, highly maneuverable vessels armed with anti-ship missiles and torpedoes, were observed deploying from multiple naval bases along the coast. Coastal defense batteries, including Iran's domestically produced Noor and Ghadir anti-ship missiles, displayed clear indicators of combat activation. And Iranian submarines, which typically remain docked or conduct very limited patrols, were detected departing their bases and submerging. Iran is not merely issuing warnings. Iran is actively preparing for combat operations. America's calculated response. The American response was immediate and carefully calibrated, designed to avoid unnecessary escalation, while simultaneously demonstrating unmistakable resolve and capability. The Pentagon issued an official statement that acknowledged Iran's communication, while firmly rejecting its underlying legal premises. The United States does not recognize unilateral claims that improperly restrict freedom of navigation in international waters. The Persian Gulf is an international waterway governed by established maritime law. American naval vessels will continue to operate in full accordance with international law, and we retain the inherent right to defend our forces if directly threatened. The statement was deliberately measured, legalistic in its framing, and intentionally undramatic in tone. But the concrete military actions undertaken simultaneously told a substantially different story about American intentions. The aircraft carrier USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, already deployed in the broader region, was repositioned to a location that placed it further from the Iranian coastline, not as a retreat or withdrawal, but as prudent defensive repositioning that reduced the carrier's vulnerability to Iranian coastal anti-ship missile systems. Additional Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, sophisticated warships equipped with the most advanced integrated missile defense systems in the American arsenal, were ordered to concentrate their patrol patterns, creating overlapping defensive coverage zones. Combat air patrols were substantially increased in frequency and duration. FA-18 Super Hornet fighters now maintain continuous aerial presence above the fleet, ready to respond immediately to any emerging threat. And critically, rules of engagement were comprehensively reviewed, updated, and clarified for commanders at all levels. What this means in practical operational terms? American commanders now possess pre-authorized response protocols for specific Iranian actions. If certain clearly defined thresholds are crossed, they are not required to seek permission from political leadership in Washington before responding. They are explicitly authorized to defend their vessels and personnel using all available means. And in naval warfare terminology, defend can mean launching anti-ship missiles that sink attacking vessels. Both nations have now positioned themselves for a potential military confrontation that neither side publicly claims to desire, but that both are unmistakably preparing to fight. The Iranian arsenal. Asymmetric warfare at sea. Let me walk you through precisely what an Iranian military attack on American warships would actually involve, and what such an attack would mean strategically. First, Iranian offensive capabilities. Iran has invested decades and enormous resources preparing for exactly this scenario. A direct military confrontation with a technologically superior American fleet, operating in waters that Iran considers its home territory. Their fundamental strategy is deliberately asymmetric in nature. Iranian naval planners recognize they cannot match American firepower in conventional ship-to-ship combat. Instead, their doctrine seeks to overwhelm through sheer numbers and strategic exploitation of geography. Anti-ship missiles represent the primary threat vector. The Noor missile, a derivative of the Chinese C-802, possesses a range exceeding 100 kilometers and carries a warhead capable of crippling or potentially sinking an American destroyer. The Khalij Fars is an anti-ship ballistic missile that descends from high altitude at velocities that make interception extraordinarily difficult using current defensive technologies. The Ghadir, the Nasser, the Zafar, Iran has methodically developed an entire family of coastal defense systems engineered for one specific purpose: destroying ships. Fast attack boats present an entirely different category of challenge. The Revolutionary Guard Navy operates more than 1,000 small vessels, highly maneuverable speedboats armed with rockets, missiles, and torpedoes. Their tactical doctrine is based on swarming attacks, simultaneous assaults from multiple directions designed to overwhelm defensive systems through sheer volume and coordination. A single fast attack boat presents minimal threat to an American Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. But 100 fast attack boats attacking simultaneously from multiple vectors present a defensive problem that no existing system can completely solve. Naval mines represent perhaps the most insidious and strategically significant threat. The Persian Gulf is relatively shallow, rarely deeper than 90 meters. This makes it ideal geography for mining operations. Iran possesses thousands of naval mines of varying sophistication, some advanced, some relatively primitive, but all potentially capable of damaging or destroying vessels that strike them. Systematically mining the Strait of Hormuz could effectively close the waterway entirely, stopping the flow of petroleum that sustains the global economy. Second, American vulnerabilities in confined waters. American warships represent the most technologically advanced naval platforms ever constructed, but they are not invulnerable, particularly in the specific geographic constraints of the Persian Gulf. The Gulf represents confined waters, the operational opposite of the open ocean environment where American naval power is optimized and most effective. Maneuver room is severely limited. Reaction time is dramatically compressed. Engagement distances are extremely short. Iranian anti-ship missiles launched from coastal positions can reach American vessels operating in the Gulf within minutes of launch. Fast attack boat swarms can close from over the horizon in less than an hour. And critically, the sheer volume of simultaneous threats that Iran can generate exceeds what American defensive systems can guarantee stopping. Aegis combat systems represent the most sophisticated integrated air and missile defense technology in the world. But even Aegis has operational limits and saturation thresholds. A true saturation attack, hundreds of missiles and attack boats engaging simultaneously in coordinated waves, would almost certainly achieve some penetration of defensive systems. Some American ships would sustain damage, some would potentially be sunk. American sailors would be killed, and the strategic consequences of such casualties would reverberate far beyond the immediate Gulf region. Understanding Iran's strategic calculation. Here's where we need to understand what is actually driving Iran to issue this ultimatum at this particular moment. This is not random escalation or impulsive action. This is calculated strategic messaging designed to achieve several specific objectives. First, military deterrence. Iran believes, with considerable supporting evidence, that Israel and potentially the United States are actively considering military strikes against its nuclear facilities and research infrastructure. The naval warning serves as a stark reminder. Any attack on Iranian territory will be answered with devastating attacks on American naval forces operating in the Gulf. The American fleet has effectively become a hostage to Iranian military capability. By making this threat absolutely explicit and public, Iran hopes to deter military action by making American planners conclude that the operational costs and political risks are simply too high. Second, domestic political consolidation. The Iranian regime currently faces significant internal pressures. The economy has been devastated by sanctions. Periodic protests simmer beneath the surface of society. The population is increasingly restive and frustrated. External military threats historically unite populations behind governments. They redirect anger outward toward foreign enemies rather than inward toward regime failures. They remind citizens that hostile forces surround the nation, that the Islamic Revolution must be defended against external aggression. The naval warning serves domestic political purposes that may be equally important as its international strategic messaging. Third, negotiating leverage creation. Iran may be deliberately seeking to create crisis conditions that enable eventual negotiation from a position of perceived strength. By demonstrating unmistakable willingness to escalate toward conflict, Iran signals to potential negotiating partners that any diplomatic settlement must fundamentally account for Iranian security concerns and regional interests. The credible threat of war becomes a bargaining chip in future negotiations. Fourth, testing American resolve. Iran wants to understand concretely how the United States will respond to direct provocation and explicit threats. Will Washington back down diplomatically? Will American warships retreat from contested waters? Will the threat of American casualties fundamentally deter American military action? The warning functions as a strategic probe, a deliberate test designed to reveal American intentions, operational constraints, and political vulnerabilities. Understanding these multiple motivations is absolutely critical to predicting what happens next. Iran has issued the ultimatum publicly and definitively. The essential question now is whether Tehran genuinely intends to act on it, or whether this represents brinksmanship that stops short of actual combat. Forces deployed. A powder keg in the Gulf. The current scale of military deployments throughout the Persian Gulf dramatically underscores the acute danger of this moment. On the American side, the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group includes the carrier itself, carrying approximately 60 combat aircraft of various types, plus multiple Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and Ticonderoga-class cruisers equipped with hundreds of vertical launch missile cells. Additional surface combatants operating independently are deployed throughout the broader region. Attack submarines, their precise locations classified, provide additional offensive and defensive capability that Iran cannot easily detect or effectively counter. And land-based aircraft stationed at permanent bases in Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain provide substantial additional strike power that could be brought to bear within hours. Total American military personnel in the immediate region number well over 20,000 service members. On the Iranian side, the Revolutionary Guard Navy has deployed what defense analysts estimate represents the substantial majority of its fast attack boat fleet, potentially several hundred vessels now actively operating in Gulf waters. Coastal defense batteries positioned along the Iranian shoreline have been activated at more than a dozen identified locations. Naval aviation assets, including helicopters and maritime patrol aircraft, are conducting intensive operational flights. And Iranian submarines, 3 Kilo-class diesel-electric boats purchased from Russia, have departed port and are now operating somewhere beneath Gulf waters. The concentration of military forces is extraordinary by any measure. Both sides have positioned for potential combat. Both sides are monitoring each other with hair-trigger alertness and minimal tolerance for ambiguous movements, And in these hypertense conditions, accidents can happen with catastrophic consequences. A misinterpreted radar contact, a warning shot that strikes a vessel, a local commander who decides to fire first rather than risk being attacked. The potential for unintended escalation spiraling beyond anyone's control is immense and growing with each hour. Historical warnings. When naval standoffs turn deadly. History offers sobering warnings about how rapidly situations precisely like this can spiral catastrophically out of control. In 1988, during the tanker war phase of the Iran-Iraq conflict, the USS Samuel B. Roberts struck an Iranian naval mine while operating in the Persian Gulf. The American military response, Operation Praying Mantis, systematically destroyed approximately half of Iran's then operational navy in a single day of combat operations. That conflict ultimately remained geographically contained, but it demonstrated with brutal clarity how quickly limited incidents can produce devastating military escalation with consequences far exceeding the triggering event. In 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, disputed contacts between American destroyers and North Vietnamese patrol boats, provided the political and legal justification for massive American military involvement in the Vietnam War. Whether the incident actually occurred as officially described remains actively debated by historians to this day. But the fundamental lesson remains crystal clear. Naval confrontations in confined waters can produce strategic consequences that far exceed the scale of the original events. The Persian Gulf today is vastly more volatile than the Gulf of Tonkin in 1964, or even the Persian Gulf of 1988. The weapon systems are exponentially more capable and lethal. The strategic stakes are dramatically higher. The involved actors are more ideologically committed to their positions. An incident that might have been diplomatically contained or militarily limited in previous eras could now trigger a regional conflagration with global implications. History strongly counsels extreme caution and restraint. But history also demonstrates repeatedly that caution and restraint frequently fail when military forces are deployed in proximity and weapons are primed for immediate use. The pressure on decision-makers. What makes this particular moment so extraordinarily dangerous is the intense, multi-directional pressure bearing down on decision-makers at every level. In Tehran, hardline elements have consolidated political control. The Revolutionary Guard, which directly controls naval forces operating in the Gulf, has consistently advocated aggressive confrontation with American power in the region. Iranian hardliners perceive the current moment as one of maximum American strategic distraction, with Washington's attention divided between Ukraine, intensifying competition with China, and severe domestic political polarization. They believe Iran has never been militarily stronger. With sophisticated missiles capable of reaching virtually any target throughout the region, with proxy forces positioned across multiple countries, with defensive capabilities significantly enhanced through Chinese and Russian technology transfers and training. Some influential figures in Tehran may genuinely believe that now represents the optimal moment to directly challenge American military presence, that the correlation of forces has never been more favorable to Iranian interests. In Washington, the overwhelming political pressure flows toward demonstrating resolve rather than accommodation. Backing down from Iranian threats would transmit a message of weakness that would resonate far beyond the immediate Gulf crisis. If American warships retreat from international waters simply because Iran demands it, American credibility suffers damage that reverberates globally. Taiwan would question American security commitments. European allies would doubt American resolve and reliability. Every adversary worldwide would learn the operational lesson that explicit threats against American forces can successfully achieve strategic objectives. The domestic and international political calculus effectively prohibits retreat or accommodation, which means American ships will continue operating in waters that Iran has publicly declared off-limits. which means the fundamental conditions for military confrontation persist and intensify. And in the Gulf itself, military commanders on both sides face impossible operational and political pressures. They must demonstrate strength and resolve without inadvertently provoking attack. They must respond decisively to genuine threats without initiating conflict through premature action. They must balance often contradictory political guidance from distant capitals against the immediate tactical reality of potentially hostile vessels operating within weapons range. One significant mistake, one critical misjudgment, one misinterpreted action could ignite a war that no one intended but that everyone is prepared to fight. International reactions. Calls for restraint without power. International reaction to the Iranian ultimatum has been swift and characterized by deep concern, but also by limited practical influence. America's Gulf Arab allies, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, have issued carefully worded public statements calling for de-escalation and restraint, while simultaneously and quietly reinforcing their own defensive military postures. These nations understand they sit directly in the potential crossfire of any conflict. Their critical oil production facilities, their desalination plants that provide drinking water, their major cities, all lie within range of Iranian missiles and potential attack. They desperately want no part of a major war fought across their territory and threatening their infrastructure. European allies have issued strong calls for restraint, with the EU's foreign policy chief characterizing the situation as extremely concerning and urgently calling on all parties to step back from the brink and pursue diplomatic solutions. The call for renewed dialogue is undoubtedly sincere, but may prove functionally futile. The realistic window for preventive diplomacy narrows dramatically when naval forces are already deployed for combat and missile systems are armed and ready. Russia and China have issued official statements that, while not explicitly endorsing Iranian actions, have criticized ongoing American military presence in the Gulf as fundamentally destabilizing to regional security. China in particular has enormous economic interests at stake. A very substantial portion of Chinese petroleum imports transit the Strait of Hormuz. A military conflict that closes the strait to commercial shipping would deliver devastating damage to the Chinese economy.